Hello, this is Francesca Recchia, and I would like to welcome you to a new episode of the Polis Project Dispatches series. Today we will be discussing the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code that was released recently by the Government of India. To do so, I'll leave the floor to Srinivas Kodali and Anand V, and as usual, will take questions from the audience, and I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca. So we are here to discuss about one small aspect of the new intermediary rules, which is off encryption. The new intermediary rules try to regulate the internet at large, including digital media houses. There are three parts, three components of it, and I believe there are people who are approaching codes for individual components, individual sections of these rules separately. But that one issue which has been being debated over the past 2 years is that of WhatsApp and finding out who has been forwarding fake news on WhatsApp. And the whole debate around this has been because there was someone who filed a public interest litigation in Madras High Court where people have asked that WhatsApp be linked or social media at large be linked to Aadhaar or any identification where people can't use the anonymity that web offers to troll others. And all of this has essentially become a debate between can WhatsApp identify people without breaking encryption, and this debate has been going on for the past few years, and now the government has essentially said that yes, uh, social media or communication apps have to find out the first originator of a particular message when government gives a particular message to these companies. So if there is a fake news that's being spreading that's viral and government hands out that message to these entities, they'll have to find out who's the guy who first spread this message through their platforms. While how they're going to implement it and whether even if it's possible that this can be implemented, they have around 80 more days or 70 more days to do it. This debate is going to heat up close to the deadline, but right now we're at the very preliminary stages on how this can even happen. So we have Anand Venkatanarayanan with us. Anand has been around this debate for a really long while, and uh, in the I would describe Anand as a cypherpunk, and I would call myself one, but he doesn't want to call himself one. Anand is a cybersecurity researcher, but end of the day, because we're discussing encryption and public key and public key cryptography at the end of the day, the whole idea where this has emerged and why it's significant. It's not the first time that governments or nation states have tried to break encryption, where they have asked tech companies to essentially install backdoors or weaken encryption. This has been happening forever. In the 90s, the US government was trying to bring on its own encryption standard called the DSA at the National Institute of Standards and Testing. But what we have right now here is that the government's claiming, oh, you don't have to break encryption, just find out who is sending what messages. So Anand, I want to start with this first question. There are claims on both sides. You have Professor Ramakoti from IIT Madras, who is part of the National Security Council at large, who is saying that WhatsApp can do this. He's a computer science professor. He's claiming that WhatsApp can find out who the first originator of a message is without breaking encryption. And then you have WhatsApp and also other IIT professors in other IITs from IIT Bombay and IIT Delhi saying, no, this is not possible. At large, these are just claims from both ends. Do you think there is proof that this can be done, or should we even look into that direction?
Okay, first of all, it is not true that there are only claims on both sides. Okay, so if you look at cryptography in general, it's pretty mathematical, correct? And the way in which you do cryptographic proofs is how you prove a mathematical theorem. You write down axioms, you write down then derivations, you use existing equations based on history, and then you write proofs. And then from the proof, you get corollaries. Okay. So that is why we call cryptography as a very elegant mathematical kind of formalism. Okay. In this formalism, to accept any algorithm as breakable or unbreakable, it takes about few years. Okay. And the way in which it works is it uses what is called as proof of deniability as a founding stone, just like science is. So what we normally come and tell is that an algorithm that remains unbreakable today may probably change tomorrow into breakability. So the way in which algorithms work is, it is you keep trying to break it over a period of time, and then if a large number of people are not successful, then you basically go into commercial deployment. That's how this field works, just like science, in the sense that you can disprove it, but you can never prove it. So any person who worked on end-to-end encryption, or this is basically the structure of encryption. And so when in this particular case of WhatsApp encryption, the encryption protocol is called Signal, right? And so the protocol has been around from 2012, if I remember right. And people have written formal proofs on why it is not breakable without breaking into one of the devices. When I say they are not breakable, the intermediary person WhatsApp can't break it. So there is basically a formal proof that is written out there. And this is the structure of how the entire debate works. So any person who comes and says here that there is both-sidism and there are claims are fundamentally missing the fact that one claim, which is E to E is not breakable by the intermediary, is backed by a decade of research, which is based on other encryption algorithm. And there is also a lot of mathematical formalism involved. And then when someone comes and claims that, oh, you can just make it work without breaking encryption by adding this extra field, how to really fit into this framework? Just like how you can't say someone who may have a mathematical degree or otherwise, if someone comes and claims 1 + 3 is equal to 13, right? Irrespective of whether the person has a degree, a profession, or a PhD or a doctorate in mathematics, doesn't really matter. You still have to stick to the way in which the field works, right? Produce proof, do research, give me mathematical proof, write me an algorithm, show it to the whole world. That is how you make claims. You just can't simply come back and make an arbitrary claim in a court or in a public domain by saying you can introduce this originator into the protocol and it will not break encryption. That is not cryptography. That is not a claim. It is simply what I would call as extremely lazy assertions. Okay, so to again put it in perspective, does it mean that it is possible for you to add originator information into the protocol and claim that it can't break E to E? Almost everyone on the cryptography side who has studied the Signal protocol will come and tell you that that claim doesn't hold. It is simply a claim, nothing more. But okay. On the other side, you have mathematically solid, rigorous proof, protocol, etc., with a decade of research. So there is no both-sidism here.
Okay, this is not the first time these kind of debates are happening over the internet, right? Like some of these debates have taken place in the early 90s when the US was trying to bring out a encryption standard. And that's when you had the NSA through the National Institute of Standards and Testing bring out the DSA standard, which was for signing, not essentially for encryption per se, but there were debates at large through the standards bodies where what standard of encryption can be used and how secure this is. And usually these debates are often centered around technical bodies, so whether it's the IETF at the with the WPC or whether it's at the sorry, or whether it's the National Bureau of Standards in the US, right? In India, we are seeing that this is per se happening at courts or inside the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and not necessarily a technical standards body where you can all share proofs, where discuss, where you have academics, or you could have mathematicians or civilian mathematicians, any of them essentially coming and showing proofs. In case of Signal, as you mentioned, Signal actually gives out all of its source code. You can verify whether your message is actually encrypted through Signal. The source code's public, the protocol's public, any changes to it are public. But when we're talking about making these changes, what if the government comes up with its own standard, its own encryption standard, where they say that this is possible and we are going to do it this way. Here, take this, implement it as a standard. The way currently the WhatsApp is using Signal, and they'll force you to do this. And some Indian company could essentially do it because of this whole rise of data nationalism that's happening, where Indian programmers are saying, "Oh, we will follow these rules." If the foreign entities who are imperialist and colonial in nature, that's the words that are being used, don't attempt to do it, we will try to do it, and the government will essentially say they're going to block these entities, right? Like China has blocked Signal now, and the Chinese have essentially been doing this forever now, and they have their own the Great Firewall, which essentially ensures that no foreign communications happen, and they have a centralized control over communications. Are we looking at something like this scenario, or what can happen?
Okay, so before we get deep down into the debate, have governments tried to regulate encryption for national security? Sure. I mean, Western governments have done it. Chinese have done it. Indian governments tried to put out a draft encryption policy maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which everyone called it as a draft encryption policy, and so on. So none of the attempt to regulate encryption by putting a standard is new. In fact, I would probably say the NSA even tried to break encryption by inserting certain code generation algorithms into a standard which they knew was breakable, which was only detected when the Snowden papers came out. And so that standard basically got thrown out. So what you're going to see here is that governments would put standards, people are going to look at it, and some of them would not pass the smell test, some of them would pass the smell test, and then later found out to be not kosher, and they would be thrown out. And so the end of it, you really have to ask yourself the basic question. If you put out a standard that you know was broken, and some people were forced to use the standard because you can invoke the law of the country and say, well, if you don't do it, you can't do business here. Do you really think people are going to be feeling safe? I mean, I don't think so, right? And there is an angle towards it. I mean, sure, you can always come back and say, we're going to ban encryption. It's not going to happen in this country. And any provider who's going to give end-to-end encryption would be not allowed to operate. Sure, you can say that. But here is the counterpoint about thinking about it. So do you really think Indian state is what I would call as cyber insecure, in the sense that it is not really a cyber power per se. It doesn't have a lot of capabilities. In fact, it probably has no capabilities on cyber defense and very little capabilities to talk about on cyber offense. So unlike China, which spent about 2 or 3 decades trying to make itself as a superior cyber power, provide a great firewall, invent a lot of technological capability, etc. The one thing why China succeeded beyond everyone's imagination in trying to regulate encryption and ban all these apps is that they have a very good GDP, and it's a huge market. And the very size of the market and the very size of the GDP allowed them to control who's coming in and who's doing business in their own terms. So at the end of it, it is not possible for you to regulate these kind of things unless until you have a huge market which you can use as an access control for anyone to get in. And then there is also this counter problem in the sense that what is the kind of economy that Chinese are? Is it like an export-dependent economy? Is it exporting software? Is it exporting services? Is it exporting manufacturing? I mean, there is a whole bunch of things that are involved. So for a service company like India, which is largely based on exporting services and software, that opportunity doesn't exist. Because the moment you come back and tell that, look, my local market is not big enough, I mean, in terms of dollar value, not in terms of population, and most of my revenue is software, and we're going to ban encryption, people are going to come and say, well, what exactly should I believe in your own service companies, right? I mean, you have a huge SaaS company base here. Would people be comfortable giving business to these SaaS companies? Because you're going to come back and say, regulation of encryption, we're going to basically get all your data. And so a country which is largely based on export of services based on data flows, this is not going to get you anywhere. I mean, trying to ban encryption and saying I have a local population and I'm going to somehow monetize all this local population into using, my own encryption software is not going to get you anywhere. The economic reality militates against it. Right? So push comes to shove, what's going to happen? The people are going to use encryption no matter what, and they're going to run VPNs. I mean, Iran had tried banning Signal some time back. They're going to use proxies. They're going to be software that will just easily punch holes through whatever the Indian government can throw on their way. And the reason I'm saying that is because you just think about the recent 2 or 3 incidences, right? The one that I was personally involved is in the Kurumkulam nuclear reactor breach, right? I mean, we didn't know for a very long time what had happened until a third-party cybersecurity company told someone else, who then basically put it out on Twitter. And then the similar thing happened with Recorded Futures report until Recorded Future came back and told none of our Indian agencies had any idea about what's going on. I mean, this is the capability of our cyber defense when it comes to critical infrastructure, which probably powers almost all of the company, I mean, all of the country, to somehow magically say that the government is going to magically get a great firewall, which is going to ban all this, and people are going to have no choice than to use the local encryption made software products, which no one wants, which no one will pay money for, is really stretching the imagination of possibility.
So at some level, they're just trying to force their way through, and when it doesn't go through, there will be a stalemate at some level. But I want to go back to crypto and the idea of encryption, right? So where do you essentially prove? Like, I mean, we did discuss the math of it, but there are also tests that you can use to see if your messages are encrypted. And when we talk about that, the NSA has probably gotten into the breaking encryption or putting in backdoors. Where do you use tests essentially? Where do you use math to essentially find out whether the end-to-end encryption is actually end-to-end encrypted? And someone just asks, what is the smell test that you keep referring to?
Okay, so to put it very differently, the end-to-end encryption protocol is out. I mean, I'll just try to explain as simple as possible. So we have always had this idea about public key cryptography, where there are 2 keys. One is a public key and one is a private key. And you keep the private key to yourself and you give the public key to anyone else. It doesn't really matter. And once you sign a message, or you just basically encrypt or sign a message, other party can easily verify whether it came from you. And this is basically the technology that has been around for 1970s, and this is what we use when software, I mean, most of us use it for e-signing. Most of it used for some of the companies basically mandatorily use for contract signing, and then there is income tax, tax filing, GST filing. So this is basically built on non-repudiability. I mean, once a message is signed by a public key, it is usually very easy to say that this is the person who did it, right? I mean, that's basically how it works. But what has happened in the case of crypto, particularly with respect to ETE, is that it uses what is called as Diffie-Hellman, which is nothing but a shared symmetric key derived out of the public keys of both the parties. So for instance, if you, Kodali, has a public key A and I have B, we exchange our keys in a form, we exchange our public keys in a form that create what is called as a shared symmetric key. Like it could be something as simple as A, B, C, D, F, G, right? I mean, this is an example. And then this key is what is being used for sending messages between you and me, correct? I will say hello, and I will encrypt it using the key called ABCDF, and you would be able to decrypt it because you also know that it's a shared symmetric key, right? And the very nature of these keys is that as the messages keep flowing between you and me, Signal essentially encrypts. The shared symmetric key keeps changing, and the public keys and your private keys also keep changing. So you could almost imagine a situation where, as I send one message and as you send me another message, the encryption key changes. That's really the heart of crypto, the E2E crypto that we are using, and it's quite transparent. We have been at it for, I mean, people have looked at it for a very long time. It's the mathematical elegance is kind of very clear. And so you look at the scheme, I mean, just like how you have mathematical algorithms, you look at the scheme, you know that public key cryptography gives non-repeatability. Shared symmetric key gives you plausible deniability. When I say that, what is plausible deniability? Because you know you know what is the current symmetric key between you and me. You can create a message as if it came from me and say it came from Anand, right? So there is no way this will actually stand up in court. I know there had been a lot of cases in India where WhatsApp chats were presented in court as evidence, but if you really follow the standard cryptographic evidence-based rule, none of those chats are admissible as evidence. I mean, this is not something that a lot of people actually understand, because you think about an example like a shared contract document. Like I employed you, or I mean, there is a contract between you and me for rendering a service and a payment. It's usually signed using our digital signatures. So if tomorrow you deliver the service and I didn't pay, you can go back and tell that, look, this was like a contract agreed on parties, and I can't go to the court and deny that I signed the contract. Okay, that's theoretically not possible. But in the case of WhatsApp chat or even a Signal thing, you can actually write a tweet today which says that I dislike Kodali, or I just want to beat him up, right? Using the shared crypto key. I mean, you can just show it in the code, but it's not admissible evidence because A, it is not signed by my public key. B, if it is encrypted using the shared key with both you and me. No, it is like having a key. I mean, you and me having the same key to go into a house. I mean, who knows who went in there, right? So this is the structure of the protocol itself. And in this, if someone comes and claims that, look, I can add one more column which says sent by Kodali, how does it make a difference, right? This is done for the explicit purpose of denying who denying proof to a third party, because it is shared symmetrically. If I send it to you, you know it is me, okay, and if you send it to me, I know it is you. But it is not possible to prove that this message was sent by you or this message was sent by me to any other third party. Okay, I mean, that is basically why this is called end-to-end encryption. And any intermediary, be it WhatsApp or Signal, has no idea what's going on here, right? The only thing they know is that I send it to you, you send it to me. I mean, apart from that, they have no idea what is going on. There is no message hashing. There is no stuff of like who sent it first. I mean, none of this exists. And this is fantastic because in a way, why should people know what you and me are talking about? I mean, of course, the problem that creates for everyone is you can't track viral messages. You can't figure out who's spreading misinformation, who's doing what, etc. And so this problem will keep coming back again and again and again to saying that what is the solution? So one solution you could think of is by doing metadata-based analysis. It has its own limitations, but in some cases it does work. I mean, that is the best I could think of. Okay, so the next question about what do you mean you pass a smell test? The smell test is basically like if you are an expert in a particular field, you look at some idea and you say, well, this is not passing the smell test. So if you're an accountant or if you're a stockbroker and you look at a stock which says that my revenue increased by 125,000% in 2 weeks, you just look at it and say it doesn't pass the smell test. So it is something very intuitive for a person who's on a field to come and look at it and say, well, this doesn't make sense because this is not how it works. a very similar thing is what we looked at when we looked at the Kamakoti proposal. It was quite obvious that it doesn't pass a smell test.
Okay. So you mean to say that it won't be mathematically, it can't be proved mathematically, and that's the whole point of crypto. And the whole idea of smell test is that it doesn't seem right, right? Like it's not legitimate. Those claims are not legitimate at some level. Now,
It is
whether
much worse than that. It is much worse than that. It is like saying someone coming and saying 1 plus 3 is equal to 13.
yeah.
Right? It just looks so wrong for any person who has a bit of understanding about how the E2E protocol and cryptography works.
Okay, so I want to ask this question. Apart from end-to-end encryption, when you say neither WhatsApp or Signal can know what's being shared, now both of them offer this feature of disappearing messages where the content itself disappears. Like whatever message you have sent, whether they have access to it or not, they don't exist anymore, right? Like you're deleting it. Or there are instances where you can delete your messages after you send it. Now, in this scenario where the proposal, the government is actually saying that every messaging app should store or find out who the first originator of a message is. I could just pass on a message, delete it, and the guy who potentially receives it shares it further and delete it. Like this could go on and on where the message essentially gets viral, but there's no existing message anymore. Now, how would one even find out who the first originator in this is? Like at some level, Signals is designed to be ensuring that this metadata, this data of even the encrypted messages do not exist anymore. Uh, so if one has to implement whatever the government's asking, they will have to start storing all of this data at large, right? How does that work?
Well, it's going to be a disaster for these companies because what the government is asking is for storing this information for every message ever sent, okay, for quite a long time. So I don't know the exact figures, but I've heard that sometimes even 1 billion messages get sent a day. 1 billion messages on an average on some days, right? So you could think about a provider in the world basically storing 1 billion messages a day for God knows how long, right? And that's basically what they're asking them. And they're basically, so to think of it rightly, what they're asking is they're saying that don't do instant messaging, do emails. Really, that's really what they're saying. Right? So in email, if you understand how it works, there is a from and a to, and there is basically a message, like the subject and the message. In the email protocol is invented in the 1970s. It was not designed for encryption. So every node in the pipeline actually sees the from and to, and most of the people don't encrypt emails, and even some people encrypt emails using GPG or PGP or whatever you call it. You still get a lot of metadata from and to. And so what the government is essentially saying is, please don't do IMs, just do emails. I mean, you can call it as IM if you want, but just do the same thing as emails, which is 1970s. So this is one way in which you come back and saying, let's not have computers. I mean, for a cryptographer like me, this is an equivalent example of saying, let's not have computers. Let's send everything on a post office postcard. I mean, because using computer is probably not good for national security. I mean, this is very similar to the same kind of argument.
Okay, so I want to get back to this. Uh, at some level, whatever the government proposing is absurd, right? The whole reason end-to-end encryption has come up is to ensure that there is no big government, that your messages are safe, and there is no one who can listen to it. And even when there is a court order that Signal gets, all Signal can essentially give up is saying that we have a lot of encrypted chunk. If you can ever decrypt it, just take it. But even that Signal allows you to delete it. So even if that doesn't exist, there's nothing that anyone can use it with. Now, the interesting question that I have is this is not limited to Signal and WhatsApp anymore, right? It's to everyone. Uh, so first originator messages, so wherever. So this technically applies to Facebook Messenger, Twitter DMs, and they are not encrypted per se. So I would say if they can definitely implement this, and the government's going to force them to implement it. So do you think people should stop using some of these other messaging apps?
See, it depends on your threat profile. If I remember it rightly, Facebook Messenger is also going to go the same route of Signal, which is full E2E encryption. And if I remember it right, on October, the EU basically said, please don't do this, because we're going to lose a lot of law enforcement capability if you end up doing this. And Twitter DMs are not E2E, so they store the messages infinitely on the backend. So, I mean, if you are really talking sensitive stuff, you should never use Twitter DM. That's basically has been the recommendation for quite a long time. The other thing that you also need to think about is, like it or not, Google is also rolling out what is called as RCS messaging, which is almost every Android app from now on is going to use end-to-end encryption. Just like Apple's iMessage stuff is coming, Google's RCS message is also going to roll out in this next year. So the broad outline is that messaging is like a really baseline service, and every top-line provider in the world are doing end-to-end encryption because their users demand security and privacy, right? And so this is 2021, and at the end of 2021, it would be very unlikely to find anyone who's not offering E2E by default as a large provider, because that is what their users want, right? And what's most likely going to happen is that people who don't offer E2E would no longer be in business, whatever the governments in the world want them to be or what don't want them to be.
Okay, so it simply boils down to between what is economically relevant and what is relevant from a very political national security front, and it boils down to what has the larger weightage. Now, in India, the whole idea of national security being paramount, or even at the world, right? Like even in the US, where the NSA and the other security agency essentially say national security is paramount, and post 9/11 and post the Bombay attacks, this has been like a precedent in terms of political or legal precedents that the government exerts the right to do whatever they want to. But the whole idea of accountability in these procedures, right? We still have a right to we still have a fundamental right to privacy. Now, technically, the government can't do any of this, which is why the whole claim that, oh, we don't want you to break the encryption because that would essentially involve breaking up or taking away your right to privacy. And this weird claim that this is all possible without breaking the encryption. Now, let's go back and talk about other rights, like forget right to privacy in this instance. There's also the whole issue of freedom of speech. If everyone, which is again Article 19 and not right to privacy is at Article 21. If one is looking at this from a very freedom of speech perspective, and also the press freedom perspective, where the press in India is very much worried that their sources or what they talk to will all be demanded. And what if all of these rules in effect are making people fear? And it's not about whether WhatsApp or Signal does it, but it's also to just instigate the fear in people to not forward messages. And I think that is definitely working, right? Like you have a parental figure in a WhatsApp admin groups who is going to say, oh no, please don't forward these messages because I don't want to end up in jail. You can definitely arrest people, WhatsApp admins. You can probably not intercept the messages, but that's very likely.
Srinivas, I don't know how to say it. The argument here is not really about privacy versus security. I would say the argument here is actually security versus security. Because even if you are, think about it, think about how spying and espionage generally works, right? When intelligence agencies cultivate assets in other organizations, in other countries, and if you are an intelligence agent in India who's handling a bunch of assets in a hostile country like Pakistan or Bangladesh or even China, I mean, who knows where it is, you are basically now putting your assets on risk if you don't have encryption at the base minimum. So I'm not very sure we have thought through about all this, right? The second problem, of course, is that the free speech thing. I mean, if any parent knows this, right, you can only police your kids so much. I mean, at the end of it, if there is an opinion, they very strongly feel about it, they're going to find out ways to share it with other people. Sharing knowledge, talking, and trying to create your own peer group are pretty much like fundamental necessities for people like Roti Kapda Makan. They're going to do it one way or the other. You really can't stop it. I mean, you can try your very best to control it and do all the things that you can, but you really can't stop it. And with respect to most of this, people would always find a way because communication is such a basic need, and private communication is such a basic need that no matter what you do, people will always find a way. I mean, so there's really no stopping it. I mean, that's what I would leave you with. I mean, you can arrest all the cryptographers and put them on jail and probably, exile them out of the country wherever you want. But there is also the next generation who's going to come and rediscover the same thing. So how are you going to stop it, right? I mean, this is as simple as saying, let's roll back technology and go to 1940s. I mean, in theory, you can control everyone, beat them up, jail them up, and say, well, you're not supposed to use a mobile phone. Try telling that to a kid, try telling that to a parent who has a kid. I mean, you know how impossible it is.
Okay, so I'm going to come to a different aspect of cryptography, currency, in fact, where the math is similar. The whole idea that cryptocurrency has come up is that you had this whole movement of crypto-anarchists in the West who said we don't trust the government with a lot of this. We don't trust them with our communication. So yes, we need end-to-end encryption, and they built PGP and crypto. Encryption at large was liberated to the masses. At the same time, they try to experiment this with bitcoins, right? Now, at some level in India right now, we're trying to ban both. End-to-end encryption, we're saying, oh, we don't want to essentially ban it, but yeah, we need some control. And in case of bitcoins, we are essentially saying, though, we're trying to bring a bill in the parliament saying these are outlawed, nobody can have them. But if you look at the report on the cryptocurrencies that was produced by the RBI and the Revenue Secretary or the Finance Secretary, whoever has done it, at the end, they accepted that we can't implement this. And the only way to look at this is if we find someone who has essentially been trading in cryptocurrencies, we will have to tax them. That's the compromise that they have at some level. But when it comes to end-to-end encryption, they somehow don't think that they can't control it, but they want control. They want WhatsApp to break it, and they are. So, in my sense, they're trying to do this by essentially stopping WhatsApp from getting access to UPI. It's stopping Facebook from entering into digital commerce in India, and Facebook really wants to get into that part of commerce. Now, either Facebook can exit the Indian market up, or essentially give up and have some agreement at some level. That's the choice that's left to them. So, where do you see the whole comparison on banning things at large by bringing laws?
See, you can't ban technology. I mean, that's like the fundamental, essential rule of a modern country. I mean, no matter what the political environment of the country is, that no country can ever ban technology. And every attempt in the last 5,000, 10,000 years to ban technology by isolating countries have failed, right? So I don't see that happening at all. I mean, you would of course make attempts, and you would just basically put the fear of jail in most of the people and not do it, but you just can't ban it. It's a fundamental human nature to do something and go forward. I mean, that is basically it. And there is really nothing more I can say about it, right? We have been doing this for a very, very long time, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years. Every time a new technology comes, people are worried, people are afraid. They try to ban it. They just try to, go back. There had been incidences in the past when computers came in. If I remember it right, it was probably the Samajwadi Party, right, who said, let's shut down computers. I mean, where do you think that led us, right? It has never happened, right? So this is also going to fail. And this is like a historical truth. There's no point reiterating it over and over. I mean, as to what WhatsApp will do, Well, it is anybody's guess. If they want to adhere to these guidelines and break the Indian market and saying we will only give a product that works only in India, well, sure, it will work only in India. And what's their competitive advantage? I mean, their competitive advantage is basically end-to-end encryption. All their rivals can't do it at scale, whether the local made ones, whatever you call them at. And but they have another option, which is Signal. Maybe 5 years ago, this kind of thing would have worked, but Signal is now a pretty popular tool. Well, could you ban a Signal? Sure, Iran tried it. It didn't work, right? And so there are limits to these kind of pushes and prods. And my fundamental perspective in this is there will be a lot of stalemate for 1 or 2 years, a lot of hoo-ha fighting back and forth. And finally, the government would probably recognize that, look, this is not working. Let's just not insist on implementing those rules. That's about it.
Or they'll shut down the internet for good.
Well, if they can shut down the internet, then there is really no digital economy left, and no modern nation can survive without encryption, to be honest.
Okay, on that note, I want to open up for questions. If there are any more questions from people, we'd be happy to pass them to Anand. But I would ask him to speak on something else meanwhile, which is a bit about what happened in the US in context of how people fought back against this, right? Like, so the last time this has happened in the US, the 90s, the Clinton administration tried to bring up this chip called the Clipper chip. And there was also pushback from the NSA saying no public key encryption. They're putting export restrictions, right? The primary way of control the government had is that if you export this encryption software, they're going to put you in jail. And I don't know what control India per se has, but they're bringing in laws that they can't implement. But what if there is this whole WhatsApp police where the police on the street ask you to show your phone and say, if you have WhatsApp or Signal installed, we're going to put you in jail. I mean, that's what it's coming down to, right? If they have to implement it.
Yeah, well, see, Srinivas, I'll tell you this. Every time these kind of rules come in, people evolve, people adapt, right? So if you remember, there used to be the messenger called Hike Messenger. It just got shut down about a year ago. The primary reason why Hike Messenger is the most sought after feature is basically what is called as a silent encryption, silent parent hiding feature, in the sense that in every messenger you would see the chats, and Hike was pretty popular among the teenagers and the kids, and they were more worried about their parents snooping on them. So basically they had a password called as the parent hide. You just put in the password, all the chats that you had marked as private and sensitive wouldn't show up to anyone. Okay, you'd open the app, you'd see all of the chats, but you would not see the ones that the kids had. The teenagers probably have with their boyfriends or girlfriends. Those wouldn't show up. And in order to show up, you have to basically go and enable the sensitive ones by typing a new password. This is basically teenage kids, right? Stuff, right? And if you're going and saying that, look, I'm going to put you on jail if I randomly stop you on the road, and if you have WhatsApp and Signal, well, people are going to figure out how to develop hidden applications, right? Which would only show up if you type in a new password. And I wouldn't go much deep into it, but those things already exist. Okay. Any person who's on the intelligence business actually understands what I'm talking about. You can actually hide a lot of applications in your phone by giving a new, by what is called as a hidden code, a hide code. This stuff is going to happen, and the more and more you push on it, the more and more people are going to use it at the common level. Just like how once upon a time the Clinton administration tried to ban encryption and saw it as military grade only. Now encryption has come to masses, correct? GPS, once upon a time, it was military grade stuff, has come to masses. So the trend of technology has always been that what is once considered military and only military use comes down to people, and that's how the progress goes forward. Encryption has already gone to the masses, and any attempt to prevent like this by saying, I will probably put you on jail if you have WhatsApp and Signal or a VPN on your phone is going to probably be the same case. People are going to go full-time active deception mode. It's going to come. It's just a matter of time. So there is action reaction. This thing will constantly keep coming. I don't see it going away, to be honest. I mean, you can do a lot of stalling. You can push back the envelope. You can put a fear of God, but it will always be there. It will just go subterranean.
Okay, so one question that I didn't ask, and I think there's a question here, is that forget both WhatsApp or Signal having access to your messages, but the actual threat is if someone just takes away your phone, if the cop actually comes out, does the data right, like if you're a news organization and they just come over, take your phones, take all of your computers away, that's the kind of threat that you're seeing in India right now, where even with all of these tools, all of the end-to-end encryption, because they are being decrypted at the client level, right, at the people's phone, the threats model suddenly changes, right? Like especially for people who are vocal against this government, journalists, politicians in the opposition, or even students, right? Like who are being arrested for no reason. So, where do you see this ending, right? Like, I mean, people are just afraid to even bring those chats, or they just have to continue deleting them. Where is physical security in this play?
See, this is a legal problem. You can't solve a political problem or an existing environment problem by technology tools, and expecting a political problem to be solved by technology is probably a very bad idea. I'll just leave it there, right? And sure, you can do disappearing messages, you can do wiping out. And the thing is that a lot of this is not something that is doable on a daily basis by normal people. I mean, we have built all those tools, but these are not tools for normal people. And you can only do so much. And there isn't much we can offer as technical people to figure out where to go with it.
There is one legal question. I'll just try to answer it myself, I guess, because it's legal. The question is essentially if someone is culpable for sending out a message, starting a message, why aren't people who are forwarding those messages not culpable, right? Like, why is the culpability of sending a particular message only with the guy who starts it? Technically speaking, I can say it could be in a different context, different messages are being shared. I can always say that I don't like the state or I don't like this particular government, and it can be interpreted in different ways by different people when they forward it. Uh, and the question is whether one should be punished for sharing a message is not up to the government, it's up to our courts, right? Like whether one should be punished at all is up to the courts. The government can bring these rules, but it doesn't mean that what you're doing is actually a crime. Uh, and unfortunately, at this stage, the government has passed these rules and has taken power for themselves. I don't think they have the authority to do it, especially after the right to privacy judgment, and when we actually need surveillance reform in this country. So I think we should not look at the whole idea of who's a criminal here, but rather look at it primarily from how and what the state is doing. So I'll end it there. But if you have any questions in particular on end-to-end encryption, we are happy to talk more. Okay. Okay, there are no more questions. I think we can end it here. Anand, do you have any last comments that you want to talk about? And you can end it.
The last comment is the next few years in India is going to be a lot of fun. With the privacy bill, PDP bill, the IL guidelines, the non-personal data bill. So as the Chinese say, it's going to be interesting times. But what it really means is anyone's guess.
Okay, thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll end the talk here.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye.